The Champions League is an elite competition where some of the best football clubs compete for the ultimate prize. Every Champions League season has its unforgettable moments, and it never fails to entertain. All the action starts in the group stage, where 32 teams compete against each other, with 16 teams advancing, 8 going down to the Europa League, and 8 going home altogether. Today we're ranking every team's performance in the 2023-2024 Champions League group stage and seeing which clubs have what it takes to go all the way. Alright, let's go. First off is Antwerp. Antwerp found themselves in a tough group, facing off against Barcelona and Porto. They came out with 1 win, 5 draws, and a -11 goal differential, which was not ideal. Their best game was a thrilling 3-2 win over Barcelona on the final match day, with their worst result coming as a 5-0 loss to the same Spanish side on match day 1. Vermeeren was their best player, scoring the opening goal in their win against Barcelona. A rough campaign for the Belgian side sees them in the F tier today. Next up is Arsenal. Arsenal found themselves in a pretty easy group, drawing PSV, Lens, and Sevilla. They ended up coming out on top with 13 points from 6 games and an impressive +12 goal differential. Their best game was a 6-0 win over Lens at home, while their worst game was a 2-1 away loss to the French side as well. Bukayo Saka was easily their best player throughout the group stage, scoring 3 and assisting on 4. Overall, Arsenal had a strong showing in the group stage, and their efforts put them in the A tier today. Next is Atletico Madrid. Atletico Madrid were the favorites heading into Group E, and they proved that with their play. They managed 4 wins, 2 draws, and a +11 goal differential to go along with 14 points. Their best game was a 6-0 demolition over Celtic, with the worst result coming as a 1-1 draw with Lazio on match day 1. Alvaro Morata led the way with 5 goals and 1 assist, while Griezmann also scored 5 goals along the way. Madrid had a very dominant campaign, and they find themselves in the A tier today. Next up is Barcelona. Barcelona went into this group looking for 6 wins from 6 games, but that wasn't the case. They managed 4 wins, 2 losses, and a +6 goal differential and 12 points, level with Porto. Their best game was a 5-0 win over Antwerp, with their worst game coming in the reverse fixture as they would lose 3-2 in the final minutes. Joao Felix and Ferran Torres put up 3 goals each in the group stage, which led Barcelona to the knockout rounds. They were good but could have been better, so Barcelona will settle for the B tier. Next is Bayern Munich. Bayern had yet another dominant campaign in the group stage, which was expected given the strength of their group. They came out on top Group A with 5 wins, 1 draw, and a +6 goal differential. Their best game was a 4-3 thriller over Manchester United, while their worst result was a 0-0 draw with Copenhagen. Harry Kane continued his impressive performance with 4 goals and 3 assists for his new club. Bayern cruised their way through this group, and their efforts put them in the S tier today. Next on the list is Benfica. Benfica found themselves in a tough but reasonable group, with Sociedad and Inter Milan standing in their way. However, 1 win, 1 draw, 4 losses, and a -4 goal differential saw them finish in a disappointing 3rd place. Their best game was a 3-1 win over Salzburg on matchday 6, with their worst result coming as a 3-1 loss to Sociedad on matchday 4. Their best player in terms of statistics was Joao Mario, with an impressive hat-trick against Inter Milan. Benfica had higher hopes for this campaign, and their efforts put them in the D tier today. Next up is Braga. Braga knew they had a long road ahead of them when they got drawn in the same group as Madrid and Napoli. They finished 3rd in their group with 1 win, 1 draw, 4 losses, and a -6 goal differential. Their best game was a 3-2 win over Berlin, with their worst game coming as a 3-0 loss to Madrid. The only player that somewhat contributed was Bruma, scoring 2 and assisting 1. Braga's disappointing campaign sees them off to the Europa League and with a D tier ranking behind them. Next up is Celtic. Celtic had some hope when they found themselves drawn into Group E, but that hope quickly disappeared. They managed 1 win, 1 draw, 4 losses, and a -10 goal differential, finishing bottom of the group. Their best game was a 2-1 win over Feyenoord, while their worst result was a 6-0 loss to Atletico on the road. There wasn't one player that stood out, but Liam Scales managed to secure man of the match in their only win. It was a rough time for the Scottish side, and they find themselves in the D tier today. Next is Copenhagen. Copenhagen found themselves in a tough spot when they were drawn into Group A, but they found a way to impress us all. 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 losses, and 8 points was good enough to secure 2nd place for the Danish side in Group A. Their best game was a crazy 4-3 win over Manchester United, with their worst result coming as a 2-1 loss to Bayern. There were a lot of impressive players on this team, with Lucas Larager leading the way with 4 goal contributions. Copenhagen were a fun team to watch, and they find themselves in the B tier today. Next up is Red Star. Red Star went into this campaign hoping to at least secure Europa League action, but even that was too much to ask. The Serbian side failed to get a single win, drew 1 game, lost 5, and finished with a -8 goal differential. Their best game was a 2-2 draw with Young Boys, with their worst result being a 3-1 loss to Leipzig. Osman Bukhari was the star player in their only draw, while the rest of the team was pretty lackluster. A campaign they like to soon forget. Red Star can go into the F tier. Next is Dortmund. Dortmund found themselves drawn into the toughest group of all, but were still hopeful to qualify for the knockouts. They did just that, winning 3 games, drawing 2, losing 1, and finishing top of the group with 11 points. Their best game was a 3-1 win over Milan, with their worst game being a 2-0 loss to PSG. Karim Adeyemi showed out, scoring 2 goals and assisting 1 along the way. Dortmund showed up in a pretty tough group, so they can go into the A tier today. Next on the list is FC Porto. Porto had an impressive campaign in what seemed like a tough group at first. They managed 4 wins, 2 losses, and a +7 goal differential, and finished level on points with Barcelona. Their best game was a 4-1 win away at Antwerp, with their worst game being a 1-0 loss to Barcelona at home. Wonderson Galeno led the way with 4 goals and 3 assists, assists as Porto secured their spot in the knockouts. Porto did a solid job in their group so they can go into the B tier today. Next is Feyenoord. Feyenoord found themselves in Group E, which meant getting to the knockouts tough but not impossible. They finished with 2 wins, 4 losses, a -1 goal differential, and only 6 points, which was not ideal. Their best match was a 3-1 win over Lazio, with their worst result coming as a 3-1 loss at home to Atletico. Santiago Jimenez was their star player in their win, scoring 2 goals to help Feyenoord along the way. They managed to finish in third, but their poor play gets them in the D tier today. Next up is Galatasaray. Galatasaray were the underdogs going into Group A, but they sure were fun to watch. They only managed to secure 5 points from 6 games, as well as conceding 13 goals, but even that was enough to secure Europa League action. Their best game was a 3-2 win over Manchester United, with the worst result coming as a 3-1 loss to Bayern. Hakim Ziyech was the star player for this team with 3 important goal contributions along the way. Galatasaray fell short of the knockouts, but their efforts were good enough for the C tier. Next is Inter Milan. Inter Milan went into Group D looking like the favorites and narrowly missed out on the top spot. They finished with 3 wins, 3 draws, and a +3 goal difference, which was good enough for 12 points and second place in the group. Their best game was an entertaining 3-3 draw with Benfica, while their worst result came as a 0-0 draw with Sociedad on the final match day. There wasn't one player that particularly stood out in these 6 games, but Jan Sommer had a strong showing against Salzburg in their 1-0 win. Inter Milan could have been better, but they were good enough for the B tier today. Next up is Lazio. Lazio came into this group with strong beliefs that they could make it to the knockouts. They finished with 3 wins, 1 draw, 2 losses, and only scored 7 goals in 6 games. Their best game was a 2-1 away win to Celtic, with their worst game coming as a 3-1 loss to Feyenoord. Ciro Immobile was solid for Lazio, scoring 3 goals, including a brace against Celtic. Lazio managed to qualify for the round of 16, so they'll go into the B tier today. Next on the list is RB Leipzig. Leipzig had a relatively easy way to the knockouts, with Manchester City being their only hurdle along the way. They managed 4 wins, 2 losses, a +3 goal differential, and 12 points in total. Their best game was a 3-1 away win over Young Boys, with their worst game coming as a 3-1 loss at home to Manchester City. Openda and Simons both had 4 goal contributions each to help secure knockout action for the German side. Leipzig had a solid showing in all their games, so they can go into the B tier. Next up is Lens. Lens found themselves drawn into Group B and were thought to be out of contention within the first few games. However, a solid run saw them come out with 2 wins, 8 points, and just missing out on knockout action. Their best game was a surprising 2-1 win over Arsenal, while their worst game saw them lose 6-0 to the same team a few weeks later. Fulgini came to the rescue in their last match against Sevilla, scoring the game winner late into stoppage time. Lens had an impressive run to secure Europa League play, and they find themselves in the C tier today. Next up is Manchester City. Manchester City were the favorites to finish at the top of Group G, and that's exactly what they did. They managed 6 wins from all 6 games and finished with a +11 goal differential and 18 points altogether. Their best game was a 3-1 away win over Leipzig, with their worst result being a 3-2 win over Red Star on matchday 6. Haaland, Foden, and Alvarez combined for 16 goal contributions in total, proving just how strong their attacking line is. Manchester City looked unstoppable in the group stage, so they can go into the S tier today. Next is Manchester United. This team really blew us away with their performances, but not in a good way. They managed a truly disappointing 1 win, 1 draw, 4 losses, and conceded 15 goals in 6 games to finish with an embarrassing 4 points. Their best game was a 1-0 win over Copenhagen, while their worst result, and there's plenty to choose from, would have been their 3-2 loss to Galatasaray at home on matchday 2. Rasmus Højlund was easily their best player, scoring an impressive 5 goals in the campaign. Manchester United's poor performances and lackluster play earned them an F tier ranking today. Next up is AC Milan. Milan found themselves alongside some very good teams in Group F, which exposed some of their weaknesses. They finished with 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 losses, and scored only 5 goals while missing out on the knockouts on goal difference. Their best game was a 2-1 away win over Newcastle, while their worst result came as a 3-0 defeat to PSG. Rafael Leao was the man of the match in their win over PSG, but overall no one really stepped up for this team. A pretty disappointing run from the Italian side. They find themselves in the C tier today. Next on the list is Napoli. Napoli found themselves as the second best team in their group, but that didn't translate in their play. They finished with 3 wins, 1 draw, 2 losses, and 10 points, with only a +1 goal differential. Their best game was a 2-0 win over Braga, while their worst result was a 3-2 loss at home to Madrid on matchday 2. Napoli had a different goal scorer in every game, but Politano put up a solid performance on matchday 4. Napoli qualified for the knockouts, but their lackluster play gets them a C tier ranking today. Next is Newcastle. Newcastle knew they had a long road ahead of them in Group F, but there was still some hope. 1 win, 2 draws, 3 losses, and 5 points was simply not enough for the English side to advance further in the competition. Their best game was a 4-1 win over PSG, with their worst result coming as a 2-1 loss to Milan, which would be enough to eliminate them. Bruno Guimaraes received the Man of the Match award in their win over PSG, while the rest of the team were quite poor in the other 5 matches. Newcastle were pretty disappointing, but given that they were in Group F, they can settle for the C tier today. Next on the list is PSG. PSG were looking for a strong start to their campaign, but it was quite the opposite. 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 losses, and only managing 8 points in total is not what the French club were looking for. Their best game was a 3-0 win over Milan, with their worst game being a 4-1 away loss to Newcastle. Zaire Emery led the way with 4 goal contributions, with Mbappe following behind him with 3. Overall, it was a pretty disappointing showing from the French side, and they find themselves in the C tier today. Next up is PSV. PSV just narrowly made it to the knockouts in what was a competitive group for their standards. They finished with 2 wins, 3 draws, 1 loss, and 9 points, which was enough to secure second place. Their best game was a 3-2 away win at Sevilla, while their worst result came as a 4-0 loss to Arsenal on matchday 1. Luke de Jong was solid for the Dutch side, while the rest of the team played their part pretty well. PSV weren't super convincing in these 6 games, so they can go into the C tier today. Next is Real Madrid. Real Madrid are always the favorites going into a Champions League season, and this year was more of the same. They finished with 6 wins from 6 games with a +9 goal differential. Their best game was a dominant 3-0 win over Braga, with their worst game coming as a 1-0 win against Berlin in September. Jude Bellingham has been amazing for Madrid so far, with 7 goal contributions for the Spanish side. Madrid continue to prove why they are the favorites, and their hot streak lands them in the S tier today. Next up is Real Sociedad. Sociedad were among the favorites in Group D, and they proved that on the pitch. They finished with 3 wins, 3 draws, a +5 goal differential, and 12 points in total. Their best game was a 2-0 away win at Salzburg, while their worst result was a 0-0 tie with the Austrian side on matchday 5. Mendes was crucial for Sociedad, putting out 4 goal contributions on their way to the top of the group. The Spanish sides showed why they belong in the competition, and their efforts get them into the A tier today. Next up is RB Salzburg. The Austrian club had nothing to lose this year, and they truly proved that. They managed 1 win, 1 draw, 4 losses, and a -4 goal differential to go along with 4 points in total. Their best game was a 2-0 away win over Benfica, while their worst result came as a 3-1 loss at home to the Portuguese side. No one really stood out for Salzburg, with Gluck leading the way with 2 goals and 1 assist. A poor showing from the Austrian side lands them in the D tier today. Next up is Sevilla. Sevilla had the potential to advance to the knockouts after finding themselves in Group B, but even that was asking too much. They finished with 0 wins, 2 draws, 4 losses, and a -5 goal differential. Their best result was a 2-2 draw with PSV on the road, while their worst result came as a 2-1 loss to Lens on matchday 6. Ramos scored 2 while Rakitic assisted 3, with no one else really showing up. An awful showing from the Spanish side, they can go into the F tier today. Next is Shakhtar Donetsk. Shakhtar were kind of a wild card in their group, and their promotion or relegation could have gone either way. They won 3 games, lost 3 games, finished with a -2 goal differential and 9 points in total. Their best game was a 1-0 win over Barcelona, with their worst result being a 5-3 loss to Porto on the road, which saw them miss out on the knockout rounds. Danila Sikan led the way with 4 goal contributions as the Ukrainian side secured Europa League action. Overall, it could have gone better for Shakhtar, so they'll go into the C tier today. Next on the list is Union Berlin. The German side found themselves in one of the toughest groups, and despite their efforts, they couldn't do much about it. They finished with 0 wins, 2 draws, 4 losses, and a -4 goal differential. Their best result was a 1-1 draw with Napoli, while their worst result was a 3-2 loss to Braga at home on matchday 2. Becker had 2 goals in that tight match with Braga, while the rest of the team were quite poor. Union put up a valiant effort in both matches against Madrid, and solely for that reason they can go into the D tier. And last but not least is BSC Young Boys. The Swiss side knew they were in for a tough ride in Group G, facing off against Manchester City and Leipzig. They managed to secure 1 win, 1 draw, 4 losses, a -6 goal differential, and a measly 4 points. Their best game was a 2-0 win over Red Star, with their worst result coming as a 3-0 loss to Manchester City. Bloom managed to secure the Man of the Match award in their sole victory, and was the only somewhat standout player for this team. A disappointing run for the Swiss side sees them in the D tier today. And there you have it, we've ranked every team that participated in this year's Champions League group stage. Only 16 teams remain, and with the knockout rounds being drawn in the upcoming weeks and months, it's tough to say who will come out and win it all. Bayern Munich, Manchester City, and Real Madrid are the 3 strongest teams so far, but in this competition there's always a surprise waiting around the corner. Let me know who you think will go all the way, and I'll catch you next time.